Is Jesus testing you to prepare you for wealth? True wealth is not measured by the liquid assets in your bank account, but by the solvency of your soul when the market of your life hits rock bottom and your self-reliance finally goes bankrupt. There's a specific kind of internal poverty that comes from being strong for too long, a high-interest debt you pay for the illusion of total independence. You did what needed to be done. You made the hard calls. You stayed independent because you thought that was the only way to build a legacy. At first, your success felt clean and controlled, like a perfectly balanced ledger. But somewhere along the way, the silence felt like a liability. You realized that you were making decisions alone, with no one left to double-check if your life even made sense anymore. No one warns you that maturity can feel this isolating, or that the pursuit of personal empire can drain the warmth. Real faith and real prosperity often grow in the most desolate places that do not feel holy or profitable at all. This is not just a story about fixing loneliness. It is about understanding the hidden costs of your strength. Once you see the true nature of your isolation, you cannot unsee the cracks in the foundation of your self-made world. Welcome to the upside-down life. The spirit of our age teaches us that independence is the ultimate dividend. We are told that to be a master of one's fate, one must be a closed system, a fortress of productivity and unshakable resolve. But the philosophy of the desert tells a different story. In the biblical tradition, isolation is rarely a punishment. It is a strategic repositioning. It is a moment where the human capital of your own willpower is proven insufficient for the scale of the journey ahead. When a person steps away, it often feels like a promotion at first. It feels like finally breathing without the burden of explanation. But the body is an honest accountant, and it knows the cost before the mind does. Your chest gets tight, your sleep gets lighter, and your thoughts get louder. The quiet changes from a luxury to a heavy atmospheric pressure. Consider the morning early, before the sun of your ambition fully commits to the day. The air is cool, but the ground already promises the heat of upcoming trials. In this space, there is no crowd to applaud your discipline, and no noise to distract you from your own heartbeat. This is where the tension of independence begins to name itself. Independence feels like maturity until it starts costing. When you choose the direction, the pace, and the rules, you also carry the full weight of every doubt and every wrong turn. Strength feels radically different when there is no audience, because without the mirror of others, you are forced to face. You are forced to face the raw material of who you actually are. I have seen many people, and I have been there myself, thinking they were being disciplined and focused. In reality, they were just tired of explaining themselves. This is a dangerous form of spiritual inflation, where we overvalue our own autonomy, while the actual value of our peace is crashing. The unsettling truth is that the divine does not always rush in to interrupt this phase of your life. There is no lightning, no voice from the clouds, just a persistent presence that refuses answers. Presence without answers is the most difficult environment for a high achiever to inhabit. It forces you to listen to the silence you have been avoiding with your busyness and your grind. Independence is never a neutral state. It is a test of your ultimate trust. It is the moment where faith stops being an inherited asset or a borrowed philosophy. It starts getting uncomfortably personal. It messes with your routines and exposes what you really rely on when the safety nets of society are stripped away. When you step out alone, the silence you encounter is not neglect from the universe. It is a form of pressure designed to reveal whether your faith was built on the convenience of presence or the substance of conviction. When there is no shared ritual and no structure to hold you up, your belief system deepens. Your belief system deepens into bedrock, or it thins out and evaporates. This test is deeply physical. In the desert, hunger changes the frequency of your prayers. Fatigue reshapes the architecture of your thoughts. The heat of the struggle makes your patience evaporate like water on a scorched stone. Faith stops being an abstract concept when your body is involved in the struggle for survival. The ancient texts do not sanitize this process. They let the sweat and the thirst sit right next to the prayer. They suggest that belief was never meant to float above the reality of your daily bread or your financial stressors. Sometimes, what we call independence is just trust. It is trust in ourselves with a thin layer of religious or philosophical language slapped on top. It is easy to call it courage when it is actually a fear of needing help. It is easy to call it faith when it is really a form of control. But the cracks always show up in the small, marginal choices of our lives. Do you wait for the right moment? Or do you rush to feel stable again? Do you listen to the quiet intuition? Or do you decide quickly just to end the discomfort? Independence often speeds you up because it is driven by the fear of falling behind. True faith often slows you down because it is rooted in the certainty of being held. This tension is brutal because one part of you wants a resolution. The other part of you is being asked for endurance and the willingness to be empty. The desert does not remove your independence. It reframes it. Being alone does not have to mean being self-sufficient, and silence does not mean abandonment. But this reframing is not glamorous. It is repetitive and often feels boring. It is the act of waking up every morning and choosing not to panic when the ledger doesn't balance yet. If your current season is revealing what you truly trust, what exactly is being exposed now that your plans are no longer working? Loneliness slips in politely, like a quiet visitor who eventually takes over the whole house. One day you are fine being the lone wolf, and the quiet feels heavy. You notice it when your meals taste flatter, and the time stretches out before you like an endless horizon. You start wondering when space turned into distance. The great figures of history did not treat loneliness as a philosophical idea. They felt it in their bones. They collapsed under trees, not because they lacked vision, but because they were humanly exhausted. They wrote their greatest works in caves, not as a hobby, but because the silence needed a place to go. Loneliness shows up when your strength runs out, not before. There is a pivot point where being alone stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a sentence. That is where your independence quietly expires, and your loneliness takes over. You did not plan to get there, but one I've got this at a time. You walked yourself into a room with no doors. What is most uncomfortable is that the solution is rarely an immediate fix. The remedy is a meeting, an encounter with honesty. We tend to spiritualize our pain to avoid admitting that we are simply hurting and hungry for connection. But the truth is that pretending you are fine is the fastest way to stay stuck in the desert. Loneliness is not a proof of failure. It is a proof of your humanity. Even the most faithful and the most successful people hit this wall. In fact, they hit it more often because they have the resources to travel further into the wilderness than anyone else. Faith does not cancel your emotional limits. It exposes them so that you can find a different source of power. The question is not why the loneliness showed up, but what you will do when it refuses to leave quietly. As we sit with this realization, we begin to see that the road we are on is leading toward a massive collision. It is the inevitable crash between the life we have built on self-reliance and the life we are being called to live through trust. This collision is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new kind of sight. When the illusions of our own strength begin to shatter, we are left standing in the wreckage of our own making. It is here that we notice the difference. We notice the difference between the price of everything and the value of nothing. We realize that the independence we sold our peace for was a currency that is now being devalued by the reality of our need. This is the first step toward maturity. Maturity doesn't isolate, but integrates. As we look deeper into this mirror of the desert, we must ask ourselves if we are ready to see what lies beneath the surface of our success. Because what happens when the silence finally stops being empty? What happens when the self-reliance we prized becomes the very thing that prevents us from moving forward? The answers to these questions are not found in more effort, but in a different kind of surrender. The light begins to shift on this landscape. We realize that the most profound changes are often the ones that happen when we think nothing is moving at all. This brings us to a place where we must examine the very mechanics of how we trust and how we let go. It is a delicate balance. It is a trade-off that requires us to re-evaluate every asset we thought we possessed. If we are to survive this season and return with something of lasting value, we must understand the fundamental conflict between the grip and the heart. The shift is subtle, but the implications are eternal. Let us move closer to that line, where the ego ends and the real life begins. As we step into this deeper analysis, we must confront the reality that our desire for control is the obstacle. The more we try to hedge against the risks of being human, the more we isolate ourselves from the very rewards we seek. It is time to look at the shadow side of our strength and ask what it is truly costing us in the long run. The next phase of this journey will require us to look at the world through a lens that flips everything we thought we knew about power and dependence. If we look at the architecture of the modern soul, we find we have built skyscrapers. We have built skyscrapers of self-reliance on foundations of shifting sand. What if the very independence you view as your greatest financial and spiritual asset is actually your most dangerous liability in the economy of the spirit? Control is a debt. Absolute control is a debt that eventually collects interest in the form of deep, unfixable loneliness. Let us peel back the layers of this American myth of the self-made man. We are told that to be wealthy, to be successful, is to be independent. We treat our lives like a private portfolio where we are the sole fund manager, the sole auditor, and the sole beneficiary. But the reverse truth is that a portfolio with only one perspective is a portfolio destined for a catastrophic crash. Loneliness is not just a feeling. It is the market signal that your spiritual capital is becoming illiquid. When you are the only one making the hard calls, you are essentially running a business without a board of directors. In the Bible, when Jesus was led into the wilderness, it was not an accident of bad planning. It was an intentional audit of his humanity. The desert is the place where your net worth is stripped away until only your true value remains. In places like New York City or the tech hubs of Silicon Valley, we see thousands of individuals who have achieved the pinnacle of financial freedom, yet they are bankrupt in the currency of connection. They have built walls of independence. They have built walls of independence so high that even the grace of God cannot seem to scale them. This is the dialectic of the shadow. The more you strive for total autonomy, the more you isolate yourself from the resources that sustain you. We think that by needing no one, we are invulnerable. But in reality, invulnerability is just another word for being trapped. If you are the only one who can fix your problems, then you are also the only one who can cause them. That is a terrifying level of pressure to put on a finite human being. Consider the person who has spent 40 years building a kingdom of one. They have the house, the car, the prestige, the perfect retirement account. But they sit at the dinner table in a silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like a foreclosure on the soul. This is where self-reliance becomes a trap. It is the point where the cost of strength exceeds the actual power you have left. In the world of finance, we call this overleveraging. You are borrowing from your future peace to pay for your present pride, and the interest rate on pride is always predatory. What if the silence of God in your life isn't a sign of His absence? What if it is a sign that He is waiting for you to admit you are out of options? We hate being out of options because it makes us feel poor. But in the teachings of Jesus, being poor in spirit is the primary requirement for entering the kingdom. It is the ultimate reverse logic. To get rich in the things that matter, you have to accept a state of total bankruptcy in your own ego. The world tells you to diversify your assets, but the desert tells you to simplify your trust. When Elijah sat under that broom tree, he wasn't just tired of the journey. He was tired of being Elijah the Great. He was tired of the performance of being the lone prophet against the world. He had hit the limit of his human capital. He wanted to resign from his position, to liquidate his life. And notice how God responded. He didn't give him a lecture on better time management or a more efficient strategy for defeating Jezebel. He gave him bread, water, and sleep. He reminded him of his physical limits. God is a very practical investor. He knows that a machine that is running too hot will eventually melt down. Independence is a machine that runs on the friction of our own effort. Trust is a machine that runs on the flow of grace. We often choose the friction because it makes us feel like we are doing something. We equate struggle with value. We think if it isn't hard, it isn't real. But if you look at the most successful systems in nature or in stable economies, they are built on interdependence, not isolation. A tree does not try to grow its own water. It relies on the rain. A business relies on a supply chain. Yet, in our spiritual lives, we try to be the sun, the rain, the soil, and the seed all at once. This is the root of the specific kind of loneliness mentioned earlier. It is the loneliness of the counterfeit God. When you try to take on the attributes of the divine, like total self-sufficiency and total control, you inevitably end up alone, because there is only room for one God in any given space. If you are occupying that throne, you evict others. You have effectively evicted everyone else, including the real creator. This is the paradox of wealth in the West. We have more than any generation in history, yet we report higher levels of despair. We have the tools to connect with anyone. We feel like no one truly knows us. This is because we have traded intimacy for influence. We have traded trust for transactions. We treat our relationships like a balance sheet. What have you done for me lately? And what do I owe you in return? But you cannot build a life on debt and credit alone. You need the equity of unconditional presence. In the Bible, the desert is the place where the balance sheet is burned. It is the place where you realize your survival doesn't depend. Your survival doesn't depend on your cleverness, but on the manna that falls from a source you cannot control. That is a humiliating realization for a self-made person. It feels like a step backward. It feels like a loss of status. But in the eyes of a 50-year philosopher, it is the first step toward true wealth. True wealth is the ability to be completely powerless and yet completely at peace. Most of us have the opposite. We have power, but we are terrified of losing it. We are high net worth individuals living in a state of spiritual poverty. Think about the way we handle our time. We optimize our calendars to squeeze out every drop of productivity. We view a quiet morning as a missed opportunity for gain, but the silence of the desert is a different kind of currency. It is a currency that buys you perspective. It allows you to see the difference between what is urgent and what is vital. If you are constantly rushing, you are a day trader. You are a day trader in your own life. You are reacting to every small fluctuation in the market of public opinion. But faith is a long-term investment. Faith is the willingness to hold on to a conviction even when the current price is low. When God is silent, the market is closed. There is nothing for you to do but wait. This waiting is the hardest part of the spiritual economy. It feels like wasted time. It feels like you are losing ground. But in that stillness, the roots are growing deeper. The character is being forged in the heat of the quiet. You are learning that you are not what you do, and you are not what you own. You are who you are when all those things are taken away. In America, we are obsessed with the comeback story. We love the idea of the person who loses everything and then gains it all back tenfold. But the biblical story of the desert isn't about gaining it back. It's about becoming a different person. It is about the transformation of the heart from a fortress of independence into a garden of dependence. A fortress is safe, but nothing grows there. A garden is vulnerable, but it is full of life. The tragedy is that we are starving inside. We have beautiful fortresses, and we are starving inside of them. We have all the security in the world, but no sustenance. We have to be willing to tear down the walls. We have to be willing to let the board of directors in. We have to admit that we are not the smartest person in the room. In the economy of God, the way up is down. The way to gain is to lose. The way to be full is to be empty. This is not just religious poetry. It is a fundamental law of the soul. If you refuse to be empty, you can never be filled with anything new. You will just keep recycling the same old anxieties and the same old strategies. You will reach the end of your life with a large bank account and a small heart. Is that the wealth you are actually seeking? If we look at the life of Jesus, we see a man who was perfectly dependent. He said he only did what he saw the Father doing. He had no home of his own, no permanent assets, no political power. Yet he was the wealthiest person to ever walk the earth because he had infinite access to the presence of God. He was never lonely, even when he was alone, because his identity wasn't tied to his independence. His identity was tied to sonship. This is the ultimate shift, moving from being an owner to being an heir. An owner has to protect everything. An heir simply has to remain in the relationship. When you see yourself as an owner, every loss is a threat to your existence. When you see yourself as an heir, every loss is just a change in the management of the estate. The father still owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. The father still holds the keys to the kingdom. The desert is where you stop trying to buy it. The desert is where you start learning how to inherit the kingdom. It is where you realize that the best things in life are not for sale. You cannot buy peace. You cannot buy purpose. You cannot buy the kind of love that stays when money runs out. Those things are only found in the place of surrender. They are found in the quiet moments when you stop talking and start listening. They are found in the heavy silence that we have been trying to avoid for so long. We think that if we stop, we will disappear, but it is only when we stop that we are finally found. The silence is not a vacuum. It is a presence. It is the hum of a reality that is more real than the one we have built with our own hands. But to hear it, we have to lower our volume. We have to stop shouting our accomplishments at the sky. We have to stop trying to prove that we are enough. Because as long as you are trying to be enough, you will never have enough. The quest for enough is a bottomless pit. It is a market that never closes and never satisfies. But grace is the realization that you are already accounted for. Your value has already been appraised by the highest authority in the universe. And that appraisal has nothing to do with your performance. It is based on the simple fact that you belong to Him. When this truth finally sinks in, the loneliness starts to change. It stops being a hole in your chest and starts being a space. It starts being a space in your soul, a space for God to dwell, a space for others to enter. You can finally be strong for others without being isolated from them. Because your strength is no longer your own, it is a borrowed strength. It is a delegated power, and because it is delegated, you don't have to worry about running out. The source is infinite. The supply is guaranteed. All you have to do is stay connected to the vine. But staying connected requires a letting go. It requires a constant letting go of our desire for autonomy. It requires us to daily admit that we need help in our culture. That is the hardest prayer to pray. We would rather pray for $1 million than pray for a humble heart. Because we think $1 million will solve our problems, while a humble heart will just make us look weak. But the $1 million will only buy you a bigger desert. The humble heart will turn the desert into a spring. This is the reverse logic of the upside-down life. It is the only way to find the warmth that independence has drained out of your days. It is the only way to find the faith that grows in the unholy places. So we must ask what we are afraid of. Are we afraid of being lonely, or are we afraid of being dependent? Usually we choose the loneliness of independence because it feels like we are in control of our own misery. Dependence feels like we are at the mercy of goodness. And that is the ultimate test of faith. Do you believe that God is actually good? Do you believe that He is a better manager of your life than you are? If you don't, you will keep running, keep building, and keep feeling that quiet ache. But if you do, you can finally sit down. You can finally breathe. You can finally let the silence speak. And what it has to say is far more beautiful than anything you could have planned. As the foundations of our empires begin to show crack, we find ourselves standing at a crossroads between the exhausted pride of the past and the terrifying invitation of a new kind of presence. This presence does not promise to restore the status quo, but to lead us into a reality of supply. Our needs are no longer seen as failures, but as the very conduits of a divine supply that never runs dry. The logic of the universe does not move by accident, and neither does the weight you are feeling in your chest right now. If we look closely at the architecture of a successful life, we see that the heavy quiet of independence is not a flaw in the design. It is a fundamental law of growth in the world of finance. We understand that accumulation requires isolation. You cannot build a skyscraper or a massive portfolio while constantly being distracted by the noise of the crowd. There is a structural necessity to the desert. When the Bible speaks of individuals moving into the wilderness, it is strategic. Think of this as the quiet phase of a massive investment. You are pouring in your time, your energy, and your silence. But the dividends have not yet cleared the bank. This is where most people quit, both in faith and in the pursuit of wealth. They mistake the silence for a lack of progress. They mistake the loneliness for a sign of failure. But the law of compounding tells us that the most significant growth happens when nothing seems to be moving on the surface. Independence is the laboratory where your true value is tested. If you can only be productive when someone is watching, you are not a leader. You are a performer. If you can only stay faithful when rewards are immediate, you are a consumer. The quiet you are experiencing is the pressure required to turn carbon into diamonds. It is the market correction of the soul. We see this pattern in the great economies of the world, where the drive for self-reliance is baked into the soil. We celebrate the self-made individual, the one who made the hard calls and stayed independent. But even the most successful venture capitalist will tell you that eventually, the system of the self reaches its limit. You can only go so far on your own steam before you hit a ceiling that requires a different kind of power. In the spiritual realm, that ceiling is where loneliness begins to leak into your days. It is the moment the universe reminds you were never meant to be a closed system. A closed system eventually runs out of energy and dies. An open system, one that admits its need for external input, for grace, and for partnership, is the only kind of system that can grow. The desert is not where you go to die. It is where you go to become an open system. It is where the illusion of total control is burned away to make room for the reality of deep dependence. This is the light of the law. If you want a harvest that lasts, you must endure the season where the seed is buried in the dark. You did what needed to be done. You made the hard calls, and that strength was necessary. But to pass through the gate, you must realize your independence has served its purpose. It has brought you to the end of yourself, which is exactly where the real work begins. Think about the way a professional athlete trains. There are hours and days of isolated work no one sees. If they only practiced when the stadium was full, they would fail when the game was on the line. Your faith is currently in the practice facility. The silence is not God ignoring you. It is the environment required to hear the instructions. The instructions are drowned out by the noise of success. when your life was busy and your pockets were full. You couldn't hear the whisper. Now, in the flatness of the day, when the meals taste like nothing, you are finally in a position. This is a logical progression. It is the cause and effect of a soul that is being prepared for a higher level of stewardship. Real wealth, the kind that survives market crashes and shifts, is always built on a foundation of character. Your character was forged in the dark. If you were given everything you wanted right now, while you are still trying to control everything, you would lose it all in a month. The loneliness is protecting you from the weight of a blessing. You are not yet strong enough to carry it. It is the safety mechanism of a loving creator who knows that premature success is a curse. So we must reframe this isolation. We must see it as the necessary overhead of a significant life. Every great visionary in history, from the prophets of old to the founders of the largest industries in America, had to endure a period where they were the only ones who saw the vision. They had to double-check their own decisions. They checked decisions because there was no one else left who understood the stakes. This is the burden of maturity. It feels like a drain on your warmth, but it is actually the insulation of your purpose. You are being made durable. Think of the difference between a cheap plastic toy and a piece of fine machinery. The plastic is easy to make and breaks under pressure. The machinery requires heat, hammering, and precision, but it can run for 100 years. The Bible doesn't clean up the sweat and the thirst, because those are the markers of the manufacturing process. You are on the assembly line of the divine. The exhaustion you feel is the physical evidence that you are being reshaped. This is not a story about fixing your loneliness. It is a story about the law of transformation. Nothing grows in a place that is always comfortable. The most fertile soil is often the most disturbed if you want to build a life of influence. If you want to build a life of true prosperity, you have to accept that the road goes through the quiet places. You have to accept that faith is not a feeling of efficiency, but a commitment to endurance. In finance, we call this the long game. You don't check the stock market every 5 minutes. If you are invested for 30 years, you trust the underlying value of the asset. Your soul is the ultimate asset. The current market conditions may look like a downturn. The fundamental value is increasing every day you stay in the desert without panicking. The quiet is not empty. It is full of potential energy, just like a spring that is being compressed. The more the silence presses, the more power. More power is being stored for the next season, but you must stay under the pressure. If you jump out of the desert too early, if you rush to fix the loneliness with cheap distractions or loud noise, you lose the energy. You become shallow. You become shallow and easily broken. The beauty of this law is that it is consistent. If you follow the process of honest dependence, the result is always a different kind of strength. It is the strength of a person who no longer fears. They no longer fear the silence because they have found what lives inside of it. They no longer fear the loss of control because they have seen that the universe is held by something much bigger. This is the light that breaks through. It is the realization that being alone was the only way to find out that you were never actually alone. The independent self had to fail so the connected self could be born. The owner had to become a steward. The boss had to become a servant. This shift is the key to every kind of abundance, from your bank account to your internal peace. Once you understand that the pressure is purposeful, the pain becomes workable. You stop asking when it will end and start asking for lessons. The moment you ask that question, the desert begins to bloom. It doesn't happen with a roar. It happens with a tiny green shoot in the sand, a small insight, a quiet sense of presence. A moment of sleep that finally feels like rest. These are the first returns on your investment. They are small, but they are solid. They are the proof that the law is working. So as we look at the way self-reliance crashes into reality, we see that it is not a disaster, but a transition. It is the pivot point of a life that is moving from the superficial to the substantial. You are moving from the illusion of security to the reality of trust, and that transition requires you to walk through the gate of silence. It requires you to hold your own hand while your heart beats fast in the dark. But remember, the sun always commits to the morning. The heat of the day will come, and the work you did in the cool of the quiet will be what keeps you standing. The maturity that feels like isolation today will feel like unshakable authority tomorrow. The independence that drains your warmth will be replaced by a presence that generates its own heat. This is the inevitable outcome for those staying. This is the light of truth that shines on the path you are currently taking. And as we move deeper into this understanding, we have to look at how this shift in posture changes the way we interact with the world around us. The transition from understanding a law to living it is where most people falter, because the distance between a conviction and a transaction is measured in blood and sweat. We have spent time dissecting the internal desert. We must look at how that desert manifests in the way you handle your capital, your time, and your legacy. In the world of finance and wealth building, there is a specific kind of isolation that mirrors the biblical desert. It begins the moment you stop following the herd and start making your own calls. True financial independence is not about the number in your bank account, but about the weight you are willing to carry alone when the market goes silent. I have seen many people mistake a bull market for wisdom, just as people mistake a busy life for a meaningful one. But when the cycle turns and the silence of the market begins to hum under your skin, that is when you realize the truth. You realize if you were building on a foundation of sand or stone, the strength to stay independent during a crash is the same strength Elijah needed under the tree. It is the realization that your self-reliance has hit a limit. You must wait for a different kind of provision. In practical terms, this means looking at your assets not as trophies of your ego, but as tools of your stewardship. Most people spend their lives chasing the high of a quick win. They want the fireworks and the noise of success. But as we have learned, God and the deep laws of the universe do not usually speak through the fire or the earthquake. They speak in the silence of compounding interest. They speak in the quiet discipline of a budget that no one else sees, and in the refusal to over-leverage your future for a comfortable today. Independence feels like maturity until it starts costing more than you expected to pay. Especially when you realize that every dollar you own is a responsibility you must manage. When you choose to be the one who makes the hard calls, you are also choosing to be the one who carries every doubt and every wrong turn. I want you to look at your daily routines, not as chores, but as the physical manifestation of your faith. If you say you trust in a prosperous future, but your daily actions are driven by the panic of scarcity, you are in an illusion. The desert of the marketplace asks you a quiet question. If the ticker tape stopped moving today, who would you be? Are you defined by the price action of your life, or by the intrinsic value of your character? There is a massive difference between the price of an asset and the value of an asset, and the same is true for a human soul. Price is what the crowd decides today. Value is what the silence reveals over time. To build wealth that lasts for generations, you must become comfortable with being misunderstood by those who are still addicted to the noise of the crowd. You must learn to read the silence of the economy, to see the gaps. Independence matures when it stops being about proving you can do it alone and starts being about holding responsibility in a relationship with reality. You still act, you still invest, and you still move forward with a steady breath. You stop trying to optimize every single second for a profit and start staying in the moment long enough to see where the true alignment lies. This is where faith stops being an abstract prayer and starts being the way you sign. This is the way you sign a contract or manage a loss. When things stop working the way you planned and your financial backup plans leak away slowly, do not panic. That leakage is the removal of the unnecessary and the burning of the ego. The ego thought it was the sole author of its success. In the desert, hunger changes how you pray. And in a lean season, risk changes how you think. The Bible lets sweat and exhaustion sit right next to prayer. Your ledger is no different. Your work is not separate from your spirit. It is the canvas upon which your spirit is revealed. If you find yourself making decisions alone with no one to double-check them, pay attention to the silence. Is it the silence of peace, or the silence of a man who has shut everyone out because he is tired of explaining himself? True wealth is the ability to be quiet without being afraid, to be independent without being isolated. It is the realization that you are no longer responsible for the ultimate outcomes, only for the next faithful step in your stewardship. This shift in posture redistributes the pressure of the world, taking it off your shoulders, taking it off your tensed shoulders and placing it back onto the laws of the universe. When you stop performing strength, you actually become durable. You become the person who can endure the road because you are no longer walking. You are walking because the road itself is where you are being formed into someone who can actually handle the weight of the fame and the fortune. The journey does not conclude with a list of answers or a guaranteed return. It settles into a companionship with the process, a steady rhythm of work and rest that recognizes the limits of the human and the infinity of the divine. As we carry these reflections back, we look at visible markers. The transformation that lasts is the one that settles into your posture when the world is not looking. We have explored the reality of order and the application of this philosophy to our daily bread, but there is one final threshold. It is the point where all these different paths, loneliness, independence, and faith, converge into a single moment of clarity. We have looked at the mirror of the desert and the language of silence, but now we must see the emergence. What remains after the fire has done its work, and how do we live in the tension of being in the world, but not of its noise? This brings us to the final movement of our journey, where the story stops being about the struggle. The story starts being about the arrival at a place of true consciousness. The convergence of these paths, the intersection of your struggle and your financial reality, is where true awakening begins. Most people chase the outcome. The desert teaches you to value the process. Financial independence is not just about having enough money to walk away from a job. It is about having enough character to stay when things get quiet. The silence is an investment period. The silence of a long investment period is exactly like the silence of the desert. Nothing seems to happen. The numbers on the screen do not move fast enough. The growth feels invisible. But this is where the roots go deep. Wealth, much like faith, is built in the dark when no one is watching. It is built in the moments you choose not to spend, not to react, and not to panic. When we talk about the upside-down life, we are flipping the script. The world says you are valuable because of what you can produce or what you can buy. The desert says you are valuable because of who you are when you have nothing left to prove. This is the ultimate financial philosophy. If you do not know who you are without your portfolio, you will never be truly wealthy. You will only be a person with a lot of numbers. But if you have walked through the isolation, you carry a currency the world cannot devalue. You carry a durability of spirit. That durability is the bedrock of sustainable prosperity. It allows you to look at a market crash and see a mirror instead of a monster. It allows you to look at loneliness and see a training ground. We must understand that our assets are only as strong as the hands that hold them. If your hands are shaking with fear or grasping with greed, your wealth will eventually slip through your fingers. But if your hands have been opened by exhaustion and then strengthened by trust, you can hold much more than money. You can hold influence, you can hold peace, and you can hold a future that is not dependent on the noise of the crowd. The Bible shows us that the greatest leaders and the most prosperous figures were those who could endure the quiet. They learned that dependence on a higher power was the highest form of maturity. It is the shift from frantic operator. An operator is always tired because they think everything depends on their effort. A steward is at peace because they know they are part of a larger system of growth and provision. This is where loneliness and faith finally meet. They strip away the ego of the operator and dress you in the wisdom of the steward. You return to your daily life, to your work, and to your investments with a different posture. You no longer need to be the loudest person. You no longer need 100% certainty to move forward. You move because you are aligned. You move because you have listened to the silence long enough to hear the direction. This kind of wealth is quiet and steady. It does not need to shout. It does not need to show off. It simply exists as a steady presence in an unstable world. And as you carry this back into your community, people will notice. They might not understand it at first. They might think you have lost your edge because you are no longer reacting to every headline or every social pressure. But they will see your stability. While others are draining their warmth, you are growing more resilient. You are building something that lasts. You are practicing a long-term mindset in a short-term world. This is the definition of true success. It is not about the peak of the mountain. It is about the person you became in the valley. It is about the strength you found when you were too tired to keep going. It is about the faith that grew when it felt like God was silent. And it is about the wealth that accumulates when you finally stop trying to control every outcome. As we finish this journey together, remember that your current season of isolation is not a waste of time. It is an investment. The market of the soul is always open, and the price of entry is often a period of quiet. Do not rush out of it. Do not try to fix the loneliness before you have understood its purpose. Let it refine your independence until it becomes a healthy responsibility. Let it deepen your faith until it becomes a durable trust. Let it reshape your view of wealth until you see that the most valuable thing you own is your character. Once you have that, you have everything. You are no longer a slave to fear and greed. You are a free person walking a path. You are walking a path that leads to genuine, lasting prosperity. Thank you for spending this time with me in the deep places. If these thoughts have helped you, join our community, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more. Sharing these videos with someone who might be feeling isolated is a powerful way to practice connection. Comment below with your own experiences of silence. Your story might be the very thing someone else needs to hear today. We are walking this road together, and your presence here matters more than you know. Stay steady, stay honest, and remember that the upside-down life is often the only one that truly makes sense. I look forward to our next video.